Welcome to the Cross Examine Live Show. It's your host Jorge Gil. Once again, here we had Dr. Fuzzrana a couple of days ago. We had Bobby Conway and Dr. Trick last week, and tonight we got Dr. John Meade. Is going to be fantastic. We're going to be talking about the Bible. You know, what's more precious than the Word of God, and that's why it gets attacked so much. So tonight we're going to go deep into how we got the Bible. We're going to be talking about, do we have the right words? Do we have the right books? We're going to be looking at a quote from Bart Ehrman, and we're going to see what Dr. Meade has to say about that. So I'm just going to bring him in. This is going to be easy. Bring him in, ask him his superhero origin story, and then from there, we're going to ask him a bunch of questions. Before I bring him in, I got to tell you, we are going to be giving away a surprise book at the end of this show, as usual. And also, we're going to tell you all about a fantastic conference that the Text Canon Institute is putting together in Phoenix. Also, we are going to have our usual Q&A. So if you're watching from YouTube, if you are on Facebook, make sure that you stick around so you can ask questions. And here it is, Dr. John Meade. How you doing, John?
I'm great, Jorge. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. I'm just happy to have you here. We had several comments of people saying, "Hey, I'm eager to learn. I'm always happy to learn something new, and you're the man for that. You're gonna teach us a lot of stuff. I'm telling you, this is what we do here at Cross Examine. We try to grab all these complex subjects and get experts like you to help us understand God better. We want to grab the stuff that are on the top shelf and bring it down here so everybody can digest it and probably, get interested in what we're doing here. So first, tell us a little bit about how you came to faith and how you ended up being not only a professor, okay, but also an academic, but also a co-director of something like the Text and Canon Institute?
Yeah, that's a long, long story. I'll try to keep it short. So I grew up in Massachusetts. It was by God's grace born into a Christian family. So I understood and was introduced to the things of the faith pretty early on. And I remember coming to faith at the preaching of God's word. I think the pastor was actually preaching, of all things, on the doctrine of hell. And as a 9 or a 10-year-old, I realized that the judgment of God was a serious thing. And that's usually the time in which I attribute coming to faith in the Lord Jesus. So, so yeah, you could say I was scared into the kingdom in many ways. And from there, I think I probably had a pretty normal high school life in many ways. But probably by my sophomore, junior year of high school, I really started to become drawn to theology, a bit more serious study of the Bible. I had no idea what the word serious meant in those days, but I knew I had people around me, like pastors and youth pastors, telling me that I should consider going to a Christian college or a Bible college to pursue deeper study of the Word and theology. And so I wound up at Columbia International University in South Carolina. And from there, I enrolled in a biblical languages major, where I was quickly introduced to things that I had kind of, if you're reading your English Bible, you realize, right, that, say, the Gospel of Mark has a shorter ending and a longer ending. You can see that in your English translation pretty clearly. I think I must have read that several times. It wasn't until I was sitting in my first semester Greek class and the Greek professor wanted to talk about the longer ending of Mark in various manuscripts. And at that point, I realized I know nothing. And so it was a truly humbling moment. And so kind of from there, picked up the elementary, grammar of Greek and Hebrew, and even Aramaic was taught at this college. And from there, I wound up at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where I was introduced to Dr. Peter Gentry. We'll talk a little more about him later, I guess. And he became a mentor to me and a real guide, pioneer in learning how to read and analyze manuscripts and textual variants of the Old Testament, the New Testament a little bit. And I ended up staying there for my PhD, which I did in Old Testament textual criticism. And right as I was graduating in 2012, I wound up taking an opening for an Old Testament professorate at Phoenix Seminary in Arizona. And so I've been in Phoenix for about 7.5 years now, teaching Hebrew, Old Testament literature, biblical theology, some advanced electives in Greek, classes like on readings in the Septuagint, or the Greek translation of the Old Testament, as well as readings in the Apocrypha. So I've walked students through various passages of books like Wisdom of Solomon and so on in Greek, just trying to, again, kind of expose students who normally don't know what those things are, but actually exposing them to the original text that they were written in. So, and then the Text and Canon Institute came about several years later, really just last year. The Phoenix Seminary Text and Canon Institute was begun by my colleague Peter Gurry, who's a expert in New Testament scholarship, and myself, kind of on the Old Testament side. We offer leadership to that. And again, we're about 1 year old, so it's kind of cool to be on a show like this, Jorge, talking about this institute.
Yeah, this is fantastic, man. I mean, since we met, we clicked, and our audience are gonna be seeing a whole lot more of you in the upcoming months and years, man. This is a relationship that we're gonna continue to nourish and allow it to grow.
Mm.
One of the things that you said is you was here in my neck of the woods. I did not know that. I live probably 20 minutes from CIU, man. That is
Yeah. Yeah.
very interesting, man. So now, Peter Gentry, we're going to be talking about him in relation to the Sacred Words Conference. Also,
Mhm.
we're going to be talking about Dr. Dan Wallace. He's going to be at the conference, but that's going to be coming a little bit more in the future. Before I get to the Bart Ehrman quote that I let everybody know earlier, you said the Text and Canon Institute.
Mm.
I want you to help me define a few terms here. So
Yes.
we're going to be able to lay down the groundwork so people can understand better as we proceed with the questions that we're going to be talking about. And again, everybody, you're open to ask us your questions or ask questions to Dr. Meade once we open the Q&A session. There's no need to ask him now in the comment section. Once we open, you can ask them. So text and canon. Textual criticism, what is it?
Textual criticism, in short, is a discipline. Some will call it a science or a science and an art. That is, there's certain objective pieces to it, but basically, textual criticism is the discipline which engages in retrieving the original wording of an author. So many of us are at least novice text critics without even knowing it, because we can spot things like typos in other people's writing. If any of us have tried to copy anything by hand, which I get is becoming more and more of a lost art these days, you know that you end up skipping words, like your mind plays little tricks on you, and it turns out that that's actually an essential part of humanity, because even trained scribes or copyists, copying one book, from one manuscript into another manuscript, make various mistakes, but they're quite predictable in some ways. And so textual critics basically try to retrace the steps of copyists, and with the remaining evidence of their manuscripts, to retrieve the original wording of ancient books.
Fantastic. And you
Yeah.
do that, right? You guys work
Yeah,
on this.
I do
Okay.
that.
Okay, now Text and Canon Institute. We talk about the canon here, the canon there. What define canon? Help us understand when we use the word canon within the biblical, the Christian context. What do we mean by that?
Yes, canon refers to the exclusive list of authoritative books. So probably the first time and I should say this, canon is an English word that comes from the Latin canon, but the Latins got it from Greek, and the Greek word is kanon. And it seems that the very first time that the Greek word kanon is used with that sense of an exclusive list of authoritative books is by the church father named Athanasius, who was the bishop off and on in Alexandria in the 4th century, right? Very prominent figure at the Council of Nicaea and in 4th century Christianity in Egypt there. But he uses the word kanon or canon to talk about how a book known as the Shepherd of Hermas was not in the canon, you see. And so around 350 AD, that's the first time on record that we have this term used that way. So the fact that he's already talking about a canon and a book not being in that canon shows that we have already an exclusive list of books, of
Absolutely, yeah.
scriptural books. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic, man. I love the way you summarize it for us. Uh, you said that you help your students through the Apocrypha. I
Hmm.
come from a Catholic background. I'm from Costa Rica. Where like everybody down there says, "Hey, I'm a Catholic." Obviously, most of us were nominal, but
Right.
you used the word apocrypha. What is the
Mm.
apocrypha,
Mm.
and why are these books only in some Bible? In other words, did the Protestant Reformation just did away with them because they didn't like them? I mean, how does
Right.
that come about?
Right. Well, this is in some ways the big question, isn't it? So so I guess a little word about the history of the so-called Apocrypha. By this, I guess most modern people would mean seven books are
Mm-hmm.
the apocryphal books. We could name them, I guess, really quickly. The books of Judith, Tobit, Wisdom of Solomon, the book of Ecclesiasticus in some Roman Catholic Bibles. Other it goes by another title of Ben Sira or Sirach. First and Second Maccabees, of course. And today, people would also lump in Baruch as
Mm-hmm.
the seventh apocryphal book. We can go back and talk about Baruch a little bit later. There's a kind of a long history to that. But the Council of Trent, Jorge, in about 1546, I believe, uh, voted that on these seven books as part of the Old Testament canon of the Catholic Church or the Roman Catholic Church at that point. So, what are these books? Well, it turns out they were written by Jews in the Second Temple period. So they're not brand new books. They were books that were around for quite a long time. The question is why the Jews don't seem to receive them into their canon. So they were never part of the Jewish canon
Hmm.
from any observable evidence. And so then the question is, how did they wind up into some Christian canons? And I think the reason for that is that these books were being read in churches for a very long time. And so
Hmm.
some church fathers, like Augustine of Hippo in North
Mm-hmm.
Africa, he lists these books among the canonical books. But on the other side, there's another church father named Jerome, and Jerome would not include these books in the Old Testament canon at all. So we have what we might say is a little bit of a debate over these set 6 or 7 books that are never officially in the canon. It seems to me until the Council of Trent in 1546. You might argue a century earlier in the Council of Florence. Of course, none of these are what we would call, say, ecumenical councils or councils that had representation for all Christians.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what might be interesting for this audience is to know that those books were read at least for edification amongst the earliest Christians.
Right.
But those same Christians did not include them in the canon. That is the exclusive list of authoritative books. So you have someone like Jerome who says these books are good to read, but we should never base a point of doctrine upon them.
Hmm.
So he would say that in his preface to the Solomonic, the books written by Solomon. So I don't know if that helps. Is that any clarifying questions on
Oh,
that?
oh,
But
oh, absolutely, man. I mean, that was fantastic. I do have one question. You said
yeah,
that they were read for edification.
yeah,
So if I'm correct in saying that it is okay for us. I mean, one of the things that I see often, and not so much in the circles where sometimes me and you be in, things like academic meetings, things like conferences of this nature, but in the more home church type of setting where people demonize these sort of books as
yeah.
if they were written by the finger of Satan himself. I think what is the can we as evangelical Christians still read that for edification? I think one of the things that I learned from Dr. Michael Heiser is that try and have that Old Testament Israelite living in my head, trying to have that Second Temple period Israelite living in my head, or that New Testament, the first century Christian living in my head, so I can understand things better. Try to
Right.
understand the context that produced the thing, so I can understand the thing better.
That's right.
What can you say about reading this apocryphal text for edification only, knowing that they're not canonical, knowing that they don't hold the authority that the rest of the books of the Bible hold?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a Protestant, and one of the avenues of study when it comes to the history of the canon is to look to see how some of the earliest reformers received these books. So
Mm-hmm.
if you turn to the 1534 German translation of the Luther Bible, and well, one thing that we'll notice immediately is that there's Old Testament books, New Testament books, and then in the middle, he actually published the German translation of the Apocrypha.
Wow.
And he includes a preface at the top where he says that although these are not equal to the scriptures, nevertheless, these books are good and useful to read. So that's from the fount of the Reformation right
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then you start to look into some other early statements of faith, like the 39 Articles of the Anglican Church, and you realize that they basically quote Jerome, which I referred to earlier, and
mhm.
they list the Old Testament books that are in all of our Bibles, but then they go on to list the apocryphal books with that preface. Uh, that is, these are good for edification, but at no point should we base a point of the faith or doctrine upon them. You see, so that really got me thinking that some of the earliest reformers and churches of the Reformation, they didn't demonize these books, the books of the Apocrypha. Rather, they retrieved what they considered to be a very early Christian view of them, which is to say these books are for edification, but not authoritative for doctrine. So let me maybe give a quick example, and then we could go on about this. But the book of Second Maccabees uh, is really interesting. One, it does contain a lot of history of the Jews right up before the time of Jesus, okay, in the
Mm.
Gospels. And so most Protestants would say, yes, these books are pretty useful for history purposes, right? They help us understand what was happening within the Jewish communities before the birth of the Messiah, right? Well, in that same book of Second Maccabees, you can see again, not points of doctrine being established, but you can see how these faithful Jews are dying because of their loyalty to the law, and they're
Mm.
actually choosing death than over eating pig's meat, pig's flesh. And you read that, and you're kind of stirred because you realize that if I was ever faced with the choice of renouncing Jesus as the Messiah, right, or death, I could actually be encouraged because the people of God have been faced with these sorts of life or death choices along the way, and a book like Second Maccabees might offer some edification there. But let me give you another example. Say a use that the reformers saw as out of bounds of Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees chapter 10, I think 12 it is, records Judas Maccabeus offering sacrifices for the dead,
Mm.
the fallen holy war soldiers who died in battle. He was offering sacrifices for. And the interesting thing is that verse was picked up around the same time as Martin Luther was reforming the church. His opponents used that verse to help establish a doctrine of purgatory. And can the soul be purified between earth and heaven, you see. And Johannes Eck argued from that verse that it could be changed. And Luther said, well, okay, I grant you that, but the problem is Second Maccabees is not in the canon.
Mm-hmm.
And so Luther, who's obviously quick and ready to say Second Maccabees is a good and useful book to read, but he's not willing to base any point of church doctrine upon it. Whereas clearly, at least some Roman Catholics in that time were very willing to do so. Does that help? I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps me because I was still paying to try to get my uncle out of purgatory. Now I'm good, man. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
That's right.
That's right. That was fantastic. Actually, I did not know that. And obviously, you know, growing up Catholic, I really never learned anything about the Bible. It was all about other things, tradition, and you know, things you have to do and marry and all of that. But this is really, really fantastic. Now, History Channel, pot blogs come up every so often and say, we found the lost Bible, and this Bible have, you know, been uncovered, and it's got these books, and, you know, they were once part of the Bible, and, you know, we have the Gospel of Thomas and the Book of Enoch and all of these things. And how do you answer that? How do you that lived in this world, that you are neck deep into this stuff, when you hear this, if it makes me giggle, now, what is your reaction? How do you answer this?
Yeah, that's really good. So there's a couple of assumptions in the Lost Bible, right? One, it almost, I always ask, well, lost with respect to whom? So is it like it could be lost on us because, you know, some of these books were truly lost and then discovered, but that's not usually how the term is meant. The term is oftentimes used to denote books that maybe early Christians didn't know about even. And so they went along and they chose the books that wound up in our Bible today over and against some books that they knew, but other books maybe they didn't even know about or something like this. And that I just find to be a really bad use of that term. So the Lost Bible. So I guess that's one thing. I guess, and I'll show you in a moment. Early Christians knew about these books that did become lost and then later discovered in the 20th century, okay, by archaeologists. But early Christians already knew them quite well and claimed to have read them, and yet have already found them wanting in terms of the canon. I think the other notion of the Lost Bible that we have to kind of unpack and unravel is, and this gets right to the heart of the canon question, is, was the canon selected? Like, was it like all the books were kind of in a lineup, and a select few Christians just sort of picked and chose certain books and left these others? Okay, and I think
what was the process like? Okay, this is it. Yeah, check. Yeah. This is it. Check. Because that is, to be honest with you, when you hear this thing, that is what comes to mind. You know, a little process. Because now we have these sort of processes now that, okay, no, we're going to leave this out. But was that the way it happened?
Right. Okay. And so yeah, Lost Bible, it really does conjure up a number of these questions. So real quick, number one, early Christians like Origen of Alexandria, he comes to mind immediately for me. But he is on record in numerous places saying all kinds of things, how he has read all the other gospels that are out there. You name it. The gospel to the Hebrews, the Egyptian gospel, the gospel of Jesus's infancy, the gospel of Thomas. Like, he is aware of all of these books. And you know what he says? Around 230, 240 AD, he says that basically, look, these people sat down and tried to write a gospel, but they lacked the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And he says it so clearly. And he says the church has always only ever had the four gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he names them. And so I like that quote because it shows that these early Christians, oh, I know what he says too. He also says, look, we've read them. So it's not like he just knows about them. We've read them.
Right.
We're not ignorant of them. Does that make sense? I like that model because even though these books are not in our canon, we should know about them and we should be aware of them so that when someone comes up and asks us about them, we're able to say, yeah, they're out there, but they're not, they lack something. They lack something authentic and genuine. And the other thing Origen says is that the church has never, ever accepted more than four gospels, which I think is actually very interesting. So, so that's something that I want to say kind of up front. Now, the question about how we got the canon, and again, this connecting with this lost Bible idea. Well, the canon, so some will say, and I can't believe how popular this still is on the internet.
Yeah, no, it's like, and it pops up every so often. It's
Yeah.
like it comes in waves. It's the weirdest thing in the world, man.
Yep. And for whatever reason, it's always the Council of Nicaea.
Okay.
Which was the first ecumenical council. Yeah, which happened around 325 AD. And the Council of Nicaea determined the New Testament canon. And ultimately, you know, in its greatest form of, like, you know, that Dan Brown, you know, put out with the Da Vinci Code, in its most theatrical form, it's really Emperor Constantine, right, who called the Council of Nicaea and therefore determined the Christian's Bible. Well, we know that this is not right for several reasons. Number one, we have lists of scriptural books, both before and after the Council of Nicaea, and there are still differences between those lists, even amongst Christians who would hold to Nicene theology on the Trinity. So there was still, for example, ongoing discussion about a book like Jude or Second Peter, not First Peter, but Jude and Second Peter, for example, were books that were so-called disputed amongst some Christians, and those books were disputed both before and still after the Council of Nicaea. So that shows me and most people that the Council of Nicaea didn't decide the canon for anybody.
Right.
So
it was
let's
still an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's still an ongoing process. That's right. So we can move that to the side, and then the second thing I guess I would say is that we know exactly where the myth came from.
Wow.
There was a 9th century Greek manuscript, and I've actually written this up on Phoenix Seminary's blog, actually.
Is that open to anybody?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think
so
that
was...
I think I called it the Council of Nicaea and the Biblical Canon. It's on
actually,
Phoenix.
people right down there in the little ticker, you go to
ps.edu.
Right, yep. That's it. It is right there. And but go ahead on.
Yeah, feel free to search that. So anyways, I wrote this up, and basically the myth starts in a 9th century AD Greek manuscript, which is basically recounting a miracle story of how we got the canon. And what you have, it's telling this story that, again, is not rooted in history at all, but it's telling a story about how there was a table with all of the scriptural books and apocryphal books on it. And the bishops at Nicaea prayed over the table. And when they were done praying, the books that were in the canon were still on top of the table, and the apocryphal books were underneath. You see, and and I think most people wouldn't think anything of it until it winds up in Voltaire's philosophical dictionary in the 1600s, and it's Voltaire's accounting of this, which I think gives it absolute widespread readership, or a widespread reading, if I can put it that way. And so he recounts the details of this myth that was, or this miracle story of the 9th century. And basically, I think that's how it winds up in Western culture and our memory. So Dan Brown capitalized on Voltaire's story, but I'm not sure he understood where Voltaire got it from, you see. And then, so that has, I think, at the root, or at least the popularizer of this idea that the Council of Nicaea is what determined our Bible, you see. And so anyways, I think that's a fascinating story. And I think the more and more we can kind of get out there that where that actually comes from, I think it actually helps both really Christians and non-Christians try to at least get the facts right.
Yeah, and have an intelligent discussion, because most of the discussions that start with this whole Nicaea thing are not intelligent at all, or end up being not intelligent at all. Now, I was going to tell you, John, this is the perfect moment to quote the illustrious Ehrman here. Dr. Ehrman says the following. He says, "The books we call the New Testament were not gathered together into one canon and considered scripture finally and ultimately until hundreds of years after the books themselves had been produced." I mean, and he's the same guy that says that there are more variants than there are words in the Bible, right? So, right. Go ahead on and tackle the first one, this first quote, and then tell me about this whole textual variance, given that you're a textual critic.
Right. Okay. So, and I'm trying to remember the full context of that statement by Bart. I've read it, but I think what Bart is getting at typically is that the New Testament books, as we know them, weren't brought or collected into one place, like a big manuscript, okay? That is like a physical book, until hundreds of years after they were written. And he must have in mind our manuscripts from the 300s or the 4th century, okay? So famously, Codex Sinaiticus, for example, is a manuscript that originally contained the entire Greek Old Testament and the entire Greek New Testament. And it's the only manuscript that comes down to us from this period, which contains all 27 books of our New Testament. So on one hand, we want to be able to say, or we can say with Dr. Ehrman, yes, not for a few centuries later were they collected into a mammoth or mega manuscript. But the question I have is that the same thing as them being considered canon from an earlier time? Okay, so I can't imagine that Dr. Ehrman would dispute that that Paul's letters by 200 AD, so, and maybe even earlier, were already considered to be a collection, a Pauline collection of letters. We can see, a church father like Tertullian in Carthage, North Africa. He is in his book 5 against Marcion. Tertullian is going through every last letter of Paul's. Okay, and then at the end he says, even Marcion, corrupts the number of the epistles. That is, it seemed like Christians like Tertullian, again, by 200 AD, already had a set number of Pauline epistles in their mind. Even before that, it's quite clear that the 4 Gospels are considered a collection, So I guess what I want to say is, before the first scribe brought all the books together in Codex Sinaiticus, or before our first New Testament canon list was put together, a lot of these books were already in collections, and they were already functioning as scripture in early Christian worship services, like liturgies, and they were already functioning as scripture in interpretation and exegesis, and so I think what I would just say is that Dr. Ehrman may have a point with a few books, those books I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
like Jude or Second Peter, Second, Third John. Those books, it does not seem, are firmly brought into any collection until the 4th century.
Mm.
So I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah.
I would say the vast core of the New Testament is long brought together before then.
I think one of the things that our audience should get from this discussion is this: the idea that we have that somehow God downloaded every single word into the mind of the writer that he inspired, because I do believe that he was an inspiration process. How did that look like? I have no idea.
Right.
But I
That's right.
think that we create this glass house by thinking that the inspiration work like a downloading a file into somebody's mind, and then this the canon came together, from one day to the next. I think we
Mm-hmm.
need to move away from these notions or these caricatures of how things happen, because
Yep.
as historians, we know to reconstruct the past is a bit difficult, right? I will
Right.
say more
That's
than a
right.
bit. So we have to be honest, and I think that would strengthen our case and not weaken it,
Yes.
because we don't have that caricature of how things happen. And I think you
Amen.
were absolutely right. Now, I was sitting in an ETS session a few years ago when Mr. Hickson and Mr. Gurry were doing a panel, and they were talking about this book that they were going to come out, and they were saying how lay level apologists were making all sorts of mistakes about the quotations, how much we can reconstruct the New Testament from the church father quotations, and how many manuscripts we have. And then Dan Wallace, and he's a mutual friend,
Mm.
he says, "Hey, hold it, man. That is your job." And they say, "Yeah, we're going to come out with a book. We have a book, and this book is going to help us. We're going to give a copy away today." But before we get to the book, the reason why I mentioned it is that I want to know why having correct information about the Bible's text and canon, exactly what they put out in this book, is important for us apologies. We have to stand on your shoulders to do our job the best way possible. So why it is important to have this correct information when we're making a case, let's say, for the reliability of the New Testament.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I think in some ways you just answered the question, because an apologetic, at least how I understand it, it's a defense, right, of the truth of God's word. Let's put it
Mm-hmm.
simply.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not able to make a defense of the truth if we're constantly using misinformation or out of date facts,
Mm-hmm.
or dare we say the word myths.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, we are apologetic. The method of our and evidence of our apologetic should match the aim, which is to defend the truth. Therefore, we probably should have truthful and verified facts and methods for how to, or for when we do that. The myths and mistakes volume, I think, should go a long way to helping pastors and apologists. And I have seen on social media, even academics who are reading this book and sort of coming out and being honest, saying, I've committed a lot of the mistakes
Yeah.
that this book talks about.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. I thought this, I
yeah,
did probably have to go and repent and because try to reach out to my old students and say, "Hey, this is the go
right,
come buy this book."
right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, this has been a fantastic time, man. We've been on for about I don't know, somewhere between 35, about 45 minutes, and I want to ask you a bunch more questions, but I
Mhm.
want to open the floor for
Mm.
our audience to ask you questions. The idea here at the Cross Examine Live show is that we bring the scholar to their home, to their living rooms, their commute, and then they can interact with you. So we're gonna open the floor for questions in just a minute. I'm gonna share with you guys the rules, the three simple rules, so you can participate in the Q&A. And also at the end, we're going to be giving away a book. Now, if you have never seen the Cross Examine live show, well, first of all, shame on you. Number two, you know that you got to be present in order to redeem the book. Okay, so if you're watching and I count to 10, and I give you your email handle, and you do not say, hey, I am here, then we move on to the next person. So make sure you stick around until the end for that. And also, it's going to be a super easy way to enter the contest or the giveaway. But before that, before the Q&A, let's talk about Phoenix Seminary. Let's talk about the Text Canon Institute. We're gonna just go ahead on and go there. And now everybody's seeing the screen. Let's start with the Text Canon Institute, because if I understand it correctly, this is your baby.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, this is the baby of, again, Peter Gurry, whom you mentioned, and myself. We co-direct the Text Canon Institute, and again, we basically are about three things, Jorge. We're about supporting excellent scholarship. I'll talk more about that in a second. We're about training the next generation through our new THM, or Master's in Theology degree. And then third, we're about providing quality resources for the church. And right now, this looks very much like organizing and hosting conferences so that we can, again, kind of hit at all three levels. As you can see, the advisory board there as well. We've got again, 5 men who believe in the project as well. So folks like Peter Gentry, Dan Wallace, Chuck Hill from RTS in Orlando, and then Peter Williams, who is the principal at Tyndale House in Cambridge in the UK, and Dirk Jonkind as well. So these 5 men have kind of encouraged us along the way. And so basically, yeah, I mean, we're hitting at kind of those 3 levels. The Sacred Words Conference, which we'll talk about in a second, really starts to it should be thought of as a resource for pastors and their local churches to come and get an answer to that fundamental question: how did we get the Bible? And so that's happening here in February 21st, 22nd. And then we have what we're calling the TCI Fellowship, which is basically a scholarship for a Master in Theology degree at the seminary. Have you had Clark Bates on your show? I can't remember.
I haven't had Clark, but I know Clark for several years now. I love Clark. He was actually at the Cross Examine Instructor Academy, which application is about to be open soon for the Cross Examine Instructor Academy. Is going to be in Dallas, Texas this year. It's going to be the second weekend in August, so get ready to apply. And Clark came to one of our intensive trainings in apologetics, and he just blew us away, man. I mean, he really did, man. He walked in there on his regular swagged out fashion, and he blew us away with his knowledge, his ability, his eloquence, his persuasion. So no, I have not had Clark, but obviously I have to bring him on board, man.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned him because he was, we've only been around for a year, and Clark is our first fellow as part of this fellowship program. And then finally, that supporting academic excellence, we can look to that Origin Colloquium. Again, this is an event that we may only get about 10 people for, but the Origin event is really a roundtable discussion of scholars who are experts on Origen and his method of ancient textual criticism. So again, textual criticism is not purely a modern phenomenon or a modern discipline. Ancient Christians were also doing what we would call textual criticism or ancient grammar, they might call it. But anyways, the Text and Canon Institute has organized this roundtable or colloquium discussion where 10 or so scholars are going to come in and give, high-level academic presentations, and then we'll open it up for discussion amongst ourselves, anyone else who comes, and then finally, Dr. Gurry, Peter Gurry, and I are going to collect those papers and have them published in a monograph series. So the Text and Canon Institute sees itself as, again, directly serving the church through things like sacred words, mentoring the next generation of Bible scholars through its fellowship program, and then again supporting academic excellence through colloquium like this Origin conference. So
I love it, man. So you guys can see, you guys easy. ps.edu. You can find the Text and Canon Institute. You can support. There is a support button right here, and then you can support them. Also, another way to support the Text and Canon Institute is to go to the Sacred Words History of the Bible Conference, February 21st and 22nd. Is going to be in, how you say it, Tempe? Oh,
yeah, Tempe, that's right.
Tempe, Arizona. Online tickets, if you buy them now, 30, 40 at the door. And tell me about the speakers and tell me about how this conference came about. You and Peter put your heads together. You say, hey, let's go ahead and do what was the motivation? Tell me.
Yeah, so the Sacred Words Conference again. And I'm sure Peter Gurry will share this with you when he's on your show next. But Dan Wallace, a longtime New Testament professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, was one of Peter's mentors when he went there as a student. So to have someone like Dr. Wallace come to our conference is really cool.
Yeah, that's heavy hitting right there, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and Dan's just a really, really nice guy and really wants to see the church more educated and informed on this matter of how we got the Bible. Again, I mentioned Peter Gentry was my mentor at Southern Seminary, longtime expert on textual criticism of the Old Testament, specializing in that Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures called the Septuagint. So he is going to again give a plenary talk. And then Steve Dempster, many might know him by his book called Dominion and Dynasty, which was published by IVP in that pretty popular series, New Studies in Biblical Theology. And Steve's a long-time expert on kind of how the Jewish canon came together, and then also how the Christian Old Testament came together as well. So obviously, we're very excited about these three gentlemen. They're going to give 1 hour plenary talks. But then I'm really excited about this other layer here that you're scrolling to with the breakout speakers. These are by comparison, younger scholars, but they are from the Southwest region. So Jeff Cate is a New Testament professor at California Baptist University, specialized in New Testament textual criticism. Darian Lockett is a New Testament professor at Biola. And Anthony Ferguson is pastoring in the Los Angeles area, but he is also adjunct faculty at Gateway Baptist Seminary there in LA. Tim Mitchell actually lives in Tucson, Arizona, but he is a PhD student at the University of Birmingham in the UK. So these gentlemen are giving talks on what is New Testament textual criticism? How does it work? That's what Dr. Cate is going to speak on. Dr. Lockett is going to speak on that thorny question about, again, those 7 general epistles, like we were talking about 2 Peter and 2nd, 3rd John. How did those books come together as a collection? That's a thorny question that he's going to address. Dr. Ferguson is going to talk on the whole matter of the Dead Sea Scrolls and what they tell us about the earliest history of the Bible. And Tim Mitchell is taking up the question of what do we mean by autograph? That is, what do we mean by a text once the author has finished it and published it in the ancient world. So I look at that wondering, man, how do I attend all 4 of those talks at the same time? Because I can't do that. I can only attend one.
Yeah.
So, but anyhow, we're very excited about this lineup of speakers coming up here in the next 5-6 weeks.
Yeah, it's gonna be fantastic, man. It's gonna be fantastic. Make sure you come, register, and show up at the Sacred Words History of the Bible Conference. You've heard it here at the Cross Examine live show. And before we go to the Q&A, make sure that you go to impactapologetics.com, impactapologetics.com. It is your one-stop shop for all things related to apologetics. It is our sponsor for tonight. And from here, you can get things like clothing. We have some super awesome shirts right here. Is our latest design. And as you can see, this says the 5 most consequential questions in life, and it has origin, meaning, morality, identity, and destiny. So you can get stuff like this. You can get DVDs, you can get downloads, you can get books, you can get a bunch of stuff. Make sure that you visit impactapologetics.com. And if you want to learn from the best, you need to come to onlinechristiancourses.com. You don't have to attend Dallas Theological Seminary to be able to sit on the Dr. Dan Wallace. All you have to do is type onlinechristiancourses.com. You are going to be sent to this page, and you can actually take the New Testament textual criticism course by Dan Wallace that starts in 9 days, 21 hours, 49 minutes, and 11 seconds. So we start January 20th, and you're going to be able to get a one-on-one time through Zoom video with Dr. Dan Wallace several times while you're going through his video course. You can have access to him. So make sure that if you're really interested in this stuff, make sure that you go to onlinechristiancourses.com. That's the easiest URL in the world, and that you can come and sign up for this amazing online course. Don't forget to support the Text Canon Institute. You can support them here. You can support them by going to the Sacred Words Conference, and also I'm sure that there are many other ways to help out. And with that being said, now we are going to go to the Q&A session. Simple rules. Number one question per person. Now, if your question is answered and nobody has any more questions, which I doubt that, but if that is the case, then you can ask another one. Number 2, concise questions. Nobody have time to be reading 3 paragraphs of stuff that you copy and pasted from either your archives of some obscure blog on the internet. Okay, make sure that they are your questions. Make sure they are concise, well written, so I can pick them out of the bunch. If you need to tag Cross Examine and YouTube or Facebook, do it so I can see your question. But don't be asking no long questions that ain't nobody got time to be reading. Okay, and number 3, only questions related to the topic. We're talking about how we got the Bible. Do we have the right words? Do we have the right books in the Bible? All of these things related to textual criticism. So make sure that you focus on that topic at hand. So now, before we start with the first questions, we got one here. Timothy Zub says the following. Timothy says the following, and he says, how cautious do we need to be with regarding to citing the historical events of the Apocrypha books as opposed to just theology?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand that question. So how careful do we need to be in discerning the historical events in the Apocrypha, and maybe not just sort of some of the theological claims that are in the Apocrypha? Yeah, that's right. So, well, I will say we need to be very careful in discerning all things, both the history and the theology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there are more learned people than me on those books, and many of them will say that say the books of Maccabees, for example, contain a large measure of history, but there might be some major embellishments or hyperbole, involved with that as well. In other words, the basic story of the Jewish people fighting back against Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth and the Seleucid reign. That's historical, right?
Mm.
We can totally affirm the books of First and Second Maccabees on this question. Did everything happen exactly how it's recorded in those books? Maybe not. There might be some literary embellishments going on, because that author has, we know his bias. His bias is to really put everybody in a very good light and to show kind of a continuity of Jewish life and worship from Ezra and Nehemiah all the way down to the 2nd century BC. So not everything is historically factual there, but there's a large measure of history in those books. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's pretty good, man. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. And before the next question, I got a great one here by James Heath Rhodes. But before that, go ahead, pick up your phone, and text Canon, one word. You can see it on the screen. You got to text Canon to 44222. You will reply with your email, and that's it. You're in. I know you millennials are watching. I know probably some Gen Zers are watching. I know you guys are lazy. You guys are spoiled by Amazon Prime, one click. So make sure that you just pick up your phone and pop in 44222 and text Canon, all one word, TEXTCANON. Put in your email and you're good to go. So we're going to go for a few more minutes and then we're going to be giving away a copy of Myths and Mistakes by Dr. Elijah Hickson and Dr. Peter Gurry, if I'm not mistaken. I think forward by Dr. Dan Wallace himself. So James says the following. He says, question, is source criticism reliable? Seems to me that it's circular. An example of this is the Q source.
Oh yeah. Okay. So source criticism. That is yeah. And can we? Yeah, I think if I understand the questioner's take on the so-called source Q, which is a source that we do not have, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's supposedly a body of statements or sayings that Jesus made. They simply called it quella or source.
Mm-hmm.
And this is supposed to be one of the sources used by the gospel writers in the composing of the gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics. And yeah, it definitely has a tendency towards circularity because you don't have the actual source to point to, and yet wherever Matthew, Mark, and Luke agree, they're supposed to go back to this common cue or source. And so yeah, I'm not an expert on the so-called synoptic problem,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, Q has always seemed uh, a little speculative in my
Okay.
mind. Yeah.
I see. Well, good
Yeah.
stuff. Well, we might bring somebody that can speak on that a little more. Like I said, I'm definitely not an expert, but I think it's wise for us to know what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know, and we have to be honest with that. And I
That's
think
right.
that is the mark of a true thinker, a true academic. When you said, "Hey, I don't know. Let's go ahead and dig deeper." Robert, I don't know how to say that last name. So Robert Delisle, I think, says the Torah appears to borrow ideas from the contemporary ancient cultures of its day, Akkadian, Ugaritic, Egyptian. Does this undercut the belief that Moses received his revelation from God? If not, why would God use ideas from pagan cultures? Now, I've heard Heiser answer this question a million times, but I'm going to let you answer it because you are, my friend, my favorite guest. Come on.
And this is one of my favorite questions. So here we go. Well, man, and this is the topic of another show, isn't it? I mean, this is a fun one.
Yeah. Well, actually, let's write that down. Okay, you said it. You said it. So let's go ahead on and put it in the books. Now, when everybody goes to sleep, me and you gonna be brainstorming him to make this happen.
Right. That's right. So, so my thought is this: is that if we could use the two words form and fill, it does seem that God, in his providence and in his wisdom, uses ancient forms. So that is something that is similar to Israel's neighbors, but he might fill it with different and unique content, okay, which would be then something very different than Israel's neighbors. Let me give you one big example. Let's take the architecture, the basic architecture of the temple. The temple in Israel has a three-part architecture, three-part structure. Anyone who walked into the outer court, right, saw the bronze altar and the laver, and you could think of this as kind of one room, one layer. And then you move from the outer court into the holy place. And there you saw the lampstand, right, the menorah, the table of showbread, and those sorts of things. And then from the holy place, you pass through the curtain with cherubim woven into it, and you wound up in the Holy of Holies with the altar of incense where the high priest entered but once a year on the Day of Atonement. Now, this all sounds really unique and really extraordinary. And then until we realize that almost every ancient temple, if not every ancient temple that archaeologists have discovered, have the same basic architecture. Outer court, big inner room, and then smaller inner room, you see. And so this has led some to conclude, wow, Israel's just similar to its neighbors, and there's nothing unique. But that's a really superficial understanding. So God communicates through this architecture that the further in you move, right, from outer court to holy place to Holy of Holies, the closer you're getting to him, the closer you're getting to the divine. But the big difference, and really the difference that turns the whole worldview upside down, is that if you're in the pagan temple in Phoenicia and you're moving from outer court to holy place to Holy of Holies, what you would see in the Holy of Holies is a statue. You would see an idol. And that idol would be there so that the priests could perform all kinds of manipulative magic on that idol to gain control over the god, so that the people could get the good life.
Right.
Yeah. In the ancient mindset, right, you want to kind of keep things status quo. Rain needs to come when rain is supposed to come. Crops are supposed to grow when crops are supposed to grow. If anything throws that off, they're in big trouble. Okay. And they believe that there's gods behind every last one of these activities. Okay. Well, in Israel, you know that you know what you're doing when you're walking from outer court to holy place to Holy of Holies. You are entering into God's presence, right? But in Israel, when you do that and you finally end up in the Holy of Holies, there is no idol. There's no statue. There's nothing there to perform manipulative magic upon so that you can get the good life. Rather, what you're met with is the Ark of the Covenant with two cherubim over it. And within that ark, underneath that mercy seat, you are met face to face with the 10 words or the 10 commandments. And in essence, what that's saying is, listen, trust and obey me, and I'll give you the good life. Right? That's what the Lord, that's what Yahweh is saying. So I, for one, am glad that God chose familiar forms to the Israelites. He didn't talk to them in a completely different language. He talked to them in a language they could understand. But when it comes time to contrast, the contrast is really important, and it really shows, I think, the big difference between, say, the Canaanite worldview and the Israelite worldview on that piece. And we could do this in a number of ways. I don't want to take too much more time from other questioners, so I'll turn it back to you, Jorge.
Yeah, well, we're gonna do a whole show about this, so don't worry about it, man. We'll just come back to that. No, that was great, man. I got one here, and it just moved a little bit. Okay, I got it right here. It says, "What are your thoughts on Craig Evans' paper, the early text of the New Testament, that claims that the original manuscripts would have been referenced for most second century manuscripts?"
Okay. So, true confessions. I've not read Craig Evans' paper.
Okay.
I heard Craig Evans give a presentation on this at Southeastern Seminary a couple of years ago, but I've actually not read Craig's paper. My thought is that the autographs don't survive that long. Okay. And in fact, if you read Timothy Mitchell's chapter in Myths and Mistakes, he's interacting with Dr. Craig Evans' view, and Tim's a real expert on the whole concept of the Greco-Roman autograph and how long they lasted, and so I would direct the questioner to that chapter in the book you're trying to give away on this show.
I see. I got well, this is similar to the one you see now. We open a can of worms. It says, "I was confronted by a friend who said that the Bible stories were stolen from and so-called copied from ancient Mesopotamia, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. I didn't believe him. Could you give me some insight? Actually, this is something that we touched on a while ago. Just rewind this once it's over, and you'll be able to see it. Probably around minute 1 hour and 15 minutes. Now I have another one, and we're gonna do a show on this. Okay, it's gonna be. We're gonna get it in the books. I have another one here. It says, "What languages were the Gospels written in?"
Yes. I think it's pretty clear that the Gospels were written in Greek. I'm convinced of that. Some might want to say they were written in Aramaic, but I think it's pretty clear that the Gospels were written in Greek. As particular period in the history of the language known as Hellenistic Greek or Koine Greek, the Gospels fit every bit the profile of what we know from ancient papyri and inscriptional texts from the same time period. That is the early middle part of the 1st century AD. So I'm fully convinced that the Gospels were written in Greek.
In Greek, excellent. Well, don't forget, everybody, this is your last chance. Make sure that you text Canon, all one word, to 44222 if you want to enter the giveaway for the book Myth and Mistakes by Dr. Elijah Hickson and Dr. Peter Gurry. And now we're going to start wrapping it up really quick here. I got another. Okay, Kim Pearson, how do you enter the book giveaway? That's a question I can answer. And I can participate too. I can be part of the Q&A. Do that. Just text the one word text canon, TEXTCANON, to 44222. Enter your email when you get the text, and then that's it. You will be part of the giveaway. It's that simple. Let's scan. Okay, this is an interesting question, and is about Matthew. Was it written first? And if it was written first, when was it written?
Well, common theory on that is that Mark was written first.
Mark.
Mark was written
Okay.
first, and that Matthew and Luke both made use of Mark as they were writing their gospels. The gospel according to Mark was one of the sources that they offered. I would argue, or I would say, most folks think, if I remember right, Mark was written somewhere in the 40s or 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew maybe sometime after that. Luke, we can date Luke a bit more clearly, right? Because Acts must be sometime before, what, 65, 66 AD in terms of, it comes up right up to Paul being imprisoned in Rome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in the mid 60s or early 60s, Luke would have had to have been written. And then most think that the gospel according to John was written last. So I hope that gets to the question. But
Yeah. Well, I got an easy one here. This is super simple. It's gonna be a breeze. Are you ready? And
yeah,
we're gonna give this. That then we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna give the book away. This one is, it says, would you say that that God did not dictate every exact word from the epistles, but he did in regards to Jesus's words in Revelation?
oh yeah.
Did you record it? Do you have it on tape?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So yeah, I would say that probably um, the only example of dictation that I know of is when God writes the Ten Commandments with his own finger, right? In
Mm-hmm.
Exodus uh, uh, 20 and also in Exodus 34. So that's the only real example of dictation that I know of. I think that John was seeing a vision, and he was recording that vision
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that he's like clawing for the right language in order to describe what is happening. And so I do think he accurately describes, again, according to and by inspiration of the
Mm-hmm.
Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
he accurately describes and portrays that vision that he sees on the island of Patmos. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. I got one more. You know, I had to sneak in one more because this is my boy Fabricio Cerebellon from Honduras, and he says this is about the New Testament. At what time in history was the apocalypses of John written? And that's it's he lives in Honduras, so Revelation, the book of Revelation, because we
Yeah.
call it, in Spanish, is never
Yeah.
Revelation. You'll never find a Bible in Spanish that says Revelation, just the apocalypse of John, right? So, when do you think this book was actually written?
Right. I personally locate it in the 90s under Emperor Diocletian. That's what seems to be um, the time of persecution that John is describing under Babylon or
Mm,
Rome in that time. Of course, there is another view that the Book of Revelation was written in the late 60s, like under the Emperor Nero, maybe
mm,
before the temple had been destroyed. Um, I I find certain things about that view um, a little too difficult to understand. So I personally lean towards the 90s. John seems to live the longest out of the apostles in order to record the vision there at that time.
Good deal. Yeah, I do have again another one, and then that's it. I promise.
Sure.
Um, what is the earliest dated original manuscript copy? And I probably mean the earliest because we don't have the autographs, but
Right.
that's probably what she mean. You know, the earliest manuscript that we have today.
Right. I need to review the Myths and Mistakes book on this now because everyone's making this mistake. So the mistake was there was a manuscript called P52 or
Mm-hmm.
Papyrus 52, which contained a few words from the Gospel of John. And if you look in your apologetics manuals today, they all say it was written or copied around 125 AD. And it was given a very specific date. I don't think we should date it like that. It's probably a right date range is something like between 150 and 250, you see. And so if it is closer to 150, then it would still be one of, if not the earliest manuscript evidence of the New Testament. Okay, but we do have several manuscripts that are fairly confidently dated to between say 150 and 250. I think we can leave it there.
So this made me think about this question. Why didn't this early manuscripts survive? Why do we are having such a difficult time finding something under 150?
Yeah, it's a good question. Now again, we do know, like we have say the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so we do know that in certain places and certain climates, certain texts can survive. Have we asked even a question? Why is it mainly? And again, the Dead Sea Scrolls are a little unique here, but why is it mainly that texts are found in Egypt and really nowhere else on the planet? You know what I mean? And so all of these early Greek New Testament manuscripts are found in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, in an old trash heap, so to speak, and because it's a very dry climate, right? And manuscripts, say in Turkey or ancient Asia Minor, didn't survive, you see, as long. So I think the great question is, why do any of these manuscripts survive? And
Right.
and it's interesting. It has to do with certain climates, and some, like Egypt, were very conducive to the preservation of manuscripts hundreds and thousands of years old now. Others, like in Italy or in Western Europe, we have hardly any evidence because of the humid and more wet climates. Things just simply deteriorated faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely understand that. I'm from Costa Rica. Then that's what you have, wet
Yeah,
and humid. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Now, what we're gonna do is again remind people text one word, text canon, TEXTCANON, no spaces, to 44222, and then we're about to give this book away, and then we're gonna do a quick recap. But before that, I want to play this video for you. And we are back. Make sure that you go to ps.edu and sign up for the Sacred Words Conference. Now, this is how it works, John. It's super simple, man. You're going to give me a number. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my email list of all of those who entered their email. And I'm going to give you a number. I'm going to allow this to refresh 3 times to make sure that everybody that submitted their email address can participate. So we have right now around 20 people that want to win this book. Now, just while I'm doing this, tell people why in the world would they need to read this book? Why is
Mhm.
it so essential?
Yeah. Well, again, this book is it's written by and I have to be careful here, Jorge. I wrote a chapter for this book as well, so I'm trying to say this with as much humility as possible. But this book is written by a real team of experts in all of these various areas. So, how many manuscripts are there? How old are they, or even how do we date manuscripts? So the questioners here tonight have illustrated a number of these questions,
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of that knowledge and information, like what is the oldest manuscript, right? How would we even determine what the oldest manuscript was? There's a whole chapter in the book on this question. There are questions about what were the earliest languages that the New Testament was translated into. We call these the ancient versions. There's a chapter in there on this book. I deal with a chapter on, is there a relationship between ancient manuscripts, the codex, and the canon, you see, because there's a whole lot on that topic in the literature. So I tried to walk the reader through an answer to that question. And I would just say that if you really want the most cutting edge research and information in a very accessible place, a very accessible work, this is the book. This is the book that you need in order to get very clear answers to those really, in some ways, timeless questions. Those questions are going to continue to be asked.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm alive, I'm going to continue to direct them to this book.
I love
So
it, man.
I hope that helps. But
I love it.
again, I'm a contributor to the book, so obviously I like the project quite a bit.
I
So
love it, man. Well, we're ready, man. People know why if they don't win, they know that they need to go to Amazon and order it right away. So we have 20 people that sign up for the giveaway. You got to give me a number
okay,
between 1 and 20.
uh-huh. Well, let's go with the number of the tribes of Israel. We'll go with 12. How
12,
about
okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I'm not going to give away the handle, but I'm going to give away the first part of the email. Is Rod Tanya, you are the winner. Make sure that you comment in the next. Yes, let's give her a round of applause.
that? Yeah.
Okay, so now we are going to see where Tanya is, and then we're gonna count down. Tanya, oh, there you go. She was ready. She's at the cross examined Frank Turek page, and she was like,
Wow.
"Woohoo!" Yes, she, Tanya Jarrett, you are the winner of the book Myths and Mistakes. All you have to do is wait for my email. I'm gonna send you an email directly and get your address, and I'll be able to send you this book. But before we sign off so I can send Tanya the book. Again, remind us a little bit, where can we find you? How can we find your work? Where do you live on the web? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. How can people reach out to you? How can people sign up for the Text and Canon Fellowship? What are these panel discussions you having about origin as a philosophy, or the colloquium, the conference? Tell us a little bit about all of
Yeah.
these once again.
Yeah. Man, this is great. So probably the best place to follow me is on Twitter at Dr. John Meade. That's my handle on Twitter. So at DrJohnMeade. That's a place where I usually tweet about all these sorts of things. If you want to follow the Text and Canon Institute, you can follow it on Twitter at Text and Canon, all one word. If you want to follow it on Facebook, you can search at Text and Canon on Facebook as well. So the handle is the same for both Twitter and Facebook. Those are two big ways to keep up with the events of the Institute, to find more out about the conferences, publications, events, and other news. Okay, there's an email list as well for the Text and Canon Institute. If you go to ps.edu/TCI, so it's a very simple URL.
Is this
ps.edu.
the same one? This one that we're seeing on the
Yeah,
screen?
that's right. The one we're looking at right now, right there. You can subscribe to our mailing list. We promise we will not fill your inbox with lots of email, but we do try to send out what becomes basically a quarterly newsletter for folks who want to keep up with what we're doing. So ps.edu/TCI, and then you could sign up on that simple form right there. So those are probably the main ways to keep up with the events of the Text and Canon Institute and myself. I also blog somewhat infrequently, but I do blog if I blog at the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, Blogspot blog, and so from time to time I will post some things there. So
Excellent. Well, man, I want to tell everybody that this right here was possible because we have organizations like Impact Apologetics to help us make this possible. And we have organizations like Online Christian Courses to help us make this possible. We have several online Christian courses that you can take. You can sit under Daniel Wallace. I think it's a course for somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks, where you're going to be able to periodically join Daniel Wallace on live Zoom and ask him questions directly. John, you know that there's probably nobody better right now to learn this from than directly from the horse's mouth. I think that's how you Americans say it, right? Directly from the horse's mouth, right? So make sure that you come to Online Christian Courses, sign up. We're going to start in 9 days, but you also have a lot of opportunities to come over here and do self-paced online courses. We have Life Compass, Jesus, You, and the Essentials of Christianity, Doubting Towards Faith, Why I Still Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Stealing from God. We got Craig Blumberg doing Historical Reliability of the Gospel. We got our friend Gary Habermas doing The Resurrection of Jesus. I mean, we have a bunch of different courses that you can come and take at your own pace. You have 12 months to go through the whole content. You don't have to worry about having to rush turning homework or anything like that. And also, you can come to Online Christian Courses. You can get books. You can get downloads. You can get DVDs. You can get gear. Some of our cross-examined gear is sold here. You can get clothes. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can get here if you want to have some gear related to apologetics. And with that being said, we love you guys. This is what we do. Cross-examine, want to bring the scholarship into your living room. Have a good time. These shows are never too serious, but we talk about serious stuff. So we're glad that you're part of this. And we want you to know that next week we're going to have Dr. Hugh Ross. We're going to be talking about Creator and Cosmos. His book is in, like, I don't know, it's been 4, 5, 6 editions because he add all these new discoveries. every year. Also, we're gonna have Dr. Peter Gurry. I don't know the exact days. Shame on me. I should have had that written down. But they're going to be up on the Cross Examine page. They're going to be up on the Facebook page for Frank Turek, the Facebook page for Cross Examine. They're going to be up on my Facebook page. You can follow me across all social media channels as Yo Soy Jorge Gil. That is YOSOY Jorge Gil. That's JORGEGIL is right there on the ticker. I know that it is easier to see it than to kind of figure it out if you don't speak Spanish like me, right? But man, John, this has been fantastic, man. I want you to be the one to say goodbye to our audience, and just we appreciate you doing this, taking the time to come and hang out with us at Cross Examine, man.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. It's been truly an honor and a pleasure, and I look forward to future shows, Jorge.
Oh, we are already going to be working on that, baby. All right. Thank you, guys. I'm Jorge Gil for crossexamine.org.